Hello, my friends. Welcome again to Spiritism, a closer look, our weekly program every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And you are at Kardec Radio. 11 years this year, Kardec Radio. Beautiful. Okay, anyway, tonight we are going to talk about the arrival of Spiritism. Spiritism, starts in 1857 with the publication of the Spirit's book, but there's a lot of history behind it. A lot of things had to happen prior to that, and in line with that. So we wanted to discuss this today, touch a little bit of. Actually, we're going to go through history, a lot of history tonight, and until we get to the arrival of Spiritism. Once again, if you have any suggestions, any comments, any questions, just let us know at kardecradio.com. You can comment live here with us. And also, if you have any suggestion of topics that you'd like us to address here in the program, yeah, we can always do that. We are happy and eager to learn just as you are. Okay, so let's go for it. The arrival of Spiritism. Spiritism being part of Christianity, or a Christian based on the arrival of Christ, starts with, I would say, Jesus in Galilee, and just going around from city to city, promoting his teachings and bringing the good message and so and so. This is all documented in the Gospels. From that point, how do we get from that point to Spiritism? We need to go back in history prior to the coming of Jesus. By the year 63 before Jesus, before Christ, by the year 63 before Christ, the Roman Empire, you can imagine, we look at all these maps of the Roman Empire, expanding and expanding. It's a huge, huge, huge domination and property of land. So with time, they are going and they are conquering and acquiring new land and new peoples under them. So by the year 63 BC, they had already acquired two lands, the land of the Greeks and the land of the Jews, the Hebrews. And there's a difference between them, a very considerable difference between these two people. First, the Greeks use for their guidance, I would say, that's probably a good word, they use philosophy. They are philosophers in nature. No wonder why all the great philosophers of history, ancient history, come from Greece. So we have, Socrates and Plato, and the list goes on and on and on. We already know the list. But why is that? Because that was their nature. Philosophy. What is philosophy? You ask a question, you get an answer. You ask a second question based on the answer. You get a second answer. You ask a third question based on the second answer, and so and so and so. That's the philosopher. It's a nonstop questioning machine, if you will, right? The great philosophers of our times are our kids. They don't stop asking us things. And, very often we shut them down. Stop asking. We shouldn't do that. But anyway, that's a whole different story. So that's a philosopher. The philosopher is that person who asks constantly. They're seeking for knowledge. Okay? Those are the Greeks. The Jews, on the other hand, had their guidance not based on philosophy, but on theology. They are these God-fearing people who, believing in God as a almost a human form, where everything happens in the snap of fingers. So God, you can read in the Bible, literally, it's there. God he wants rain. So he snap fingers, he rains. He snap fingers, thunder comes along. He snap fingers, and this happens and that happens. So this is what theology is. It's anything that believes that we are guided by acts of God solely, like that, snap of finger style. So those are virtually 100 degrees apart in terms of thinking. One is philosophy, ask everything. The other is you can ask, it's God. Okay, so coming back, by the year 63, the Roman Empire has these two people under them. So they have to kind of live together in a way under the same ruling emperor and, kings with them. Now, that's not the worst comes. Upon that, they were being dominated by a third line of thought, which is paganism. What is important in paganism? Sacrifices, doing rituals. Doesn't matter if you believe or not. There's nothing written about that. You can't find manuscripts in paganism saying this is how you do sacrifice. You go here, you do this, number one, this, number two, that. There is no such a thing. It's not a written form of documenting anything. There is no documentation of anything like that. So now we have three things that kind of collide because they're totally different, and these three people, these three ideas, they have to live together under the Roman laws. So when Jesus comes up, so we have three things going on, right? We have paganism, we have theology, and we have philosophy. When Jesus comes along, he goes through, the Galilee and everything, teaching his message, explaining what needed to be explained at the time. We're not going to get too much into that. We just want to browse through history right now. So when he dies, and the apostles and Paul, they kind of take over, if you will, and start disseminating the message to other areas away from Judea throughout the empire, things start to change a little bit. There's a point where philosophy disappears altogether. And that's not very far after the death of Jesus. It's maybe 2 decades, if that much. Philosophy starts to disappear. Theology starts to dominate. It just doesn't dominate paganism, because Christians at the time, they were being persecuted until the year 312. That's when Christians can put their head above the water. They can breathe. No more persecutions, no more killing Christians, nothing like this. And that's because the emperor Constantine, who took over the empire, he decided to make or Christianity the official religion of the empire. The circumstances, that made it happen are pretty interesting. Really, really quickly, the empire, the Roman Empire, had been divided in two parts: the western part and the eastern part. The eastern part was also called the Byzantine Empire, and that's where under Constantine was the ruler. On the western part, there was another ruler. Constantine wanted to unify the empire. He wanted the western part. So he declares war to the Western Empire. And, the other ruler says, yeah, let's go to war. So they go to war. And just a few days before the actual date that supposedly, the war was going to take place around Rome, Constantine finds out that the information they had about the enemy wasn't really correct. The enemy had a lot more soldiers, a lot more structure that they had, and they said, we're going to get killed, we're going to get crushed here. And some of his advisors said, well, let me throw my 2 cents in here. And the idea is, we see all these strange people called Christians. no matter what happens, if we go after them, if things go wrong, if it doesn't matter, they're always happy, they're always with their hearts, like if they were at peace with themselves. It's incredible. And they attribute this thing to Jesus. And they they have these, they carry these small crosses as a symbol of their faith to Jesus, who died 300 years ago. And then Constantine said, well, I want these crosses on my protection devices. I want to mark these crosses, because if they help these people and make them happy, who knows, he's going to make me win the war. And he wins the war because of a huge mistake, strategic mistake on the other ruler. And he wins the war, and he attributes the war to Jesus. So Jesus helped me here. So he kind of stops the persecution. Christians can no longer be, persecuted. He establishes Christianity as the official religion of the empire. So from that point on, things start to change, because you see, Constantine and everybody around him, they were not Christians from the get-go. They were pagans. So what they do is, now Christianity is official, but I don't know exactly what Christianity is. I don't know much about it. All I know is that Jesus protected me and I won the war. So now I'm going to learn a little bit about this Christianity, what it is, what it does, what I should do, what I should not do. They knew nothing about it. So in order to organize and understand what Christianity is, they organized what was defined as the Council of Nicaea in the year 325, where the rulers with some priests and people in the church got together to produce a document describing what Christianity is. So just by doing this, can you imagine the number of, I would say, pagan elements that populated the idea of Christianity? And from that point on, the church is created, and it's created contaminated. That's probably a good term for that. Contaminated with pagan elements. What are these pagan elements? Dogmas, rituals, sacrifices, because that's what the pagans were doing. Establishment of festivities and celebrations that made no sense whatsoever for any Christians. And it goes on and on and on. And that's in the year 325. By then, remember, we had three things. We had paganism, we had theology, and philosophy. By then, paganism kind of disappears, because they're going to follow what the priests and the church is saying. So paganism disappears. And philosophy had been dead for 300 years almost. So what prevails as of that time is theology. Again, theology is God does this, and it's always snap of fingers. And you can ask. There are dogmas and rituals, and you can't ask. You cannot place a single question. Why this, why that? Don't even think about it. Okay? All right, so we go on throughout history, through a million different things. We go through crusades, we go through the Inquisition, and it goes on and on and on. Well, when it gets to about 1750, a little bit before 1750, a group of Greek philosophers, just let me give you another element. In 1640, so about 100 years before that, René Descartes, one of the great philosophers of all time, started throwing the idea that how come we don't use philosophy for anything? How come we don't ask questions? Well, he kind of didn't want any trouble with the church, so that kind of, was in the back burner. But he was the one who brought the idea, why are we asking questions? These things, these dogmas and rituals, they're not written on the Gospels. Why are we doing this? So it kind of dies or settles for 100 years. By 1750, a group of French philosophers, because they were in disagreement, strong disagreement with the absolute monarchy in France and the dogmas of the church, they raised a group of philosophers that later on came to be very well known: Diderot and Montesquieu, Voltaire, Adam Smith, creator of capitalism, Immanuel Kant, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. All of these people came out and said, listen, people, why do we have brains? What are our brains for? Is to think. We have reason. We're not animals. We have reason. We have rationals. Let's ask questions. The church is just, this thing is not right. They keep saying, don't ask, don't ask, don't ask. How come? We need to ask. That movement is called the Age of Enlightenment, where these philosophers had the idea that by asking questions, we're gonna enlighten ourselves, because we're gonna have more knowledge. We're gonna know more that the church allows us to know, which is literally nothing. So one of the great elements, or one of the, maybe the key element that comes out of the Age of Enlightenment, was a French philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So he was the one that got probably the most popular one in the group. So he was very influential. One of his uh, closest followers was Johann Pestalozzi. And Johann Pestalozzi was a Swiss pedagogue, educator, whose best student by far was Allan Kardec. So Allan Kardec, from a very young age, from the age of 10, studied in the institute created by Pestalozzi, Institute of Verdun, and he had this idea of, we gotta ask, because that's what Pestalozzi was bringing up, because he was in fully agreement with the Age of Enlightenment, and that's the goal behind the Age of Enlightenment. Let's ask. We can't stay small because the church says so. So, they go and asking questions. So Allan Kardec inherits that idea of, we gotta ask. No wonder why the Spirit's book is not in written form, in written text, standard written text. It's a series of questions and answers. Questions and answers. And exactly for that reason. So Allan Kardec is, digesting all of that. But there's another thing that happens 50 years later, 50 years after the Age of Enlightenment, which is the Industrial Revolution. Starts in England, and it starts to propagate throughout Europe, where things are now going to be automated. We're going to have machines helping us do certain things. In order to be able to produce these machines and make it happen, there was a method. You can't just do, I want to do this. No. That's where science had its turning point. We got to establish methods of doing things to be successful and be able to reproduce. So I can make the same machine 1,000 times, and all 1,000 machines are going to be exactly the same. So the method of the Industrial Revolution will be the same method will be used by Allan Kardec in all his work. That's how he goes to the mediumistic meetings with the questions in hand, questions, philosophy, right? About the other side, theology, and with a method of asking and making sure that the questions and answers follow a rational, a reasonable procedure. So all of this had to come together before 1857. The Industrial Revolution, the great years, the great first years were between, I would say, 1800 and 1850. So just in time for what we needed to bring a new philosophy that will ask everything and anything, that will address our questions and concerns that we had for centuries and we could never really ask. And not only that, it was based on moral standards. It had a solid base. And those moral standards come from the teachings of Jesus. So you see, Spiritism becomes this tripod, science, philosophy, and religion, because of all these things happening at the same time, or one after the other, rather. But they had to come together, and Spiritism uses all of that. That's why it's a completely different body of knowledge. It will address things differently. Spiritism does not come from any form of dissidence of Christianity, like we had so many throughout history. The first one being probably on 1054, when the church splits into the Western Church, and that's where the Roman Catholic Church is born, and the eastern part of the empire will be will be named the Orthodox Christianity. That's the first, huge break. The second break is Protestantism in 1517 with Martin Luther. So you see, we don't come from any dissidence, any disagreement. We come from what Jesus said. Regardless of the history of Christianity, we're not. I mean, we study because we need to know. It's obviously we need to know. But if we didn't know much about the history, we would still believe what we believe, because our moral base does not come from any council of Nicaea, any council of any city, any meeting between incarnated rulers. Nothing like this. It comes from what Jesus said. So what does it bring? What does Spiritism bring us? It provides a new visibility altogether, new visibility, because it comes from spirits. It doesn't come from men, rulers, priests. It comes from spirits that are living at least one layer higher than ours, above us. They know things now that we don't as incarnates. We will when we discarnate. So these aspects will be brought in, and it will give us a completely different new visibility, to the point that we have to take a new approach, new meaning to things like heaven and hell, life and death, punishment, angels, demons, all of those things, all of these words that had old style concepts associated with them. We're going to have to revise those concepts, because we are getting information that is one layer above ours. So understanding the material life, that the material life is not as important as the spiritual life, it's very clear in Spiritism. Very, very clear. So when Spiritism arrives, it will change everything. Of course, the church doesn't like it. That's a whole different story. But I wanted to close by saying something that is right here in this book, the Medium's book. We spoke about Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the French philosopher, part of one of the integrants of the Age of Enlightenment. When he died, okay, he comes back later on, as Allan Kardec is publishing the codification. He comes back as a spirit to dictate a message that is in the Spirit's book. It's on chapter 31 of the Spirits book. Chapter is called Dissertations by Spirits, and there's a message from Jean-Jacques Rousseau, which, of course, at the time, he knew nothing about Spiritism because it just wasn't there. Right? So he died way before even Kardec was born. But here's the message. Here's not the entire message, but just a little bit of it, so we can think and reflect upon. So this is Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Spirit telling us, I think that Spiritism is an entirely philosophical study of concealed causes and inner movements of the soul, which have been little defined or not defined at all until today. Let's go back. It's a philosophical study, philosophy. That's him. That's Age of Enlightenment. Of concealed causes. Concealed causes. Dogmas do not let you ask and find out anything. So don't ask. So Spiritism is here to kind of challenge the dogmas. Study of concealed causes and inner movements of the soul. Don't we talk all the time about inner transformation, inner movements of the soul? That's what he's proposing, inner movements of the soul. But in order to do this, you gotta ask. You gotta have a little bit of philosophy in your soul that is gonna trigger the process. If you can't ask, the movements of the soul are not gonna happen. And he continues, which have been little defined or not defined at all until today. Today, when he said it. Because of the church. The church is on top of everybody. You can't say, you can't ask, you can, you're going against us if you do this. That was the church. He continues, Spiritism. Spiritism explains more than it unveils new horizons. Explains new horizons. See, that's a new visibility. He continues, reincarnation and the trials that you must bear before arriving at the supreme goal are not mere revelations, but full confirmations of the truth. How do we know that? Because we get information from one layer above us. He continues, I'm struck by the truth that are being brought to light by means of Spiritism. And he goes, I say means intentionally because I view Spiritism as a lever that breaks down the barriers of blindness. Wow. It's a lever that breaks down the barriers of blindness. This is the philosopher, one of the triggers of a lot of other things among the ideas that were being introduced to the population and being understood and internalized at the time. No wonder why they were able to, dismantle the entire absolute monarchy in France. Because when you ask and you do not accept, why are we having this? Why do we have to do this way, to live this way? And that's what Spiritism proposes. Ask everything and anything. Don't hold back. Spirit's book is a series of questions and answers instead of, just written text, because it made sense at the time to do a Q&A style book, Spirit's book. So this particular, I would say, dissertation, right, by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, especially because it's him. He has a role in the whole thing here, in the whole picture. I hope you understood his role. So that gives even more weight to what he said and to his ideas. So we have Gabriel telling us exactly that. Yeah, paganism, theology, and philosophy. So see Spiritism as a lever. Good idea, thanks. Thank him. His name is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Okay, Gabriel, thank you so much for your participation. And think about all of this. If Spiritism had to wait, let's just put it this way, if Spiritism had to wait for philosophy to be uh, uh, back in place, it means we have to ask everything. Allan Kardec tells us that. Ask everything and anything. The last publication by Allan Kardec, so we can close for tonight, was called uh, a rational book. What he did is he wrote a book. It's not really a book, it's more like a pamphlet. And it's a book about, he called Catalogue Rational, which is a rational catalog, which is a catalog of books. It's a list of books that anybody trying to assemble a Spiritist library should have, or a Spiritist center should have, at his time, of course. So we're going back in 1869 when he died. That he published this book days before he died. I think 1 month before he died. In this book, the list of books comes categorized. So books about Spiritism, books this, about philosophy, and so on and so on. So the last part, the last list, the last set of books is called books against Spiritism. And you go like, how come? What's happening to him, right? And then he explains, if you don't know what they don't know about us, you're just going to think they're just going to say anything against us, but they don't know. You need to understand why they're saying something against Spiritism. So let's understand why. How do I understand why? Let's read what they wrote. Let's find out what's written by these people against Spiritism so we can understand them. And not only that, if they have an argument in their writings that when I read, I go like, wow, that's a good argument. I don't know how to explain that. What does it tell you? That we, as Spiritists, need to go after that answer. We need to seek the answer. Philosophy, ask, read, seek the answer. If they tell us something, that's very typical. Materialists said, how do we explain God? Or God does not exist, whatever. They tell us this all the time. How do we react? How do we explain this to them? If we don't know why they're saying this, they're going to say, we're going to walk away, and that's all. But I need to be able to produce an answer against this. And for me to do this, I need knowledge. I need to ask. That's philosophy. Spiritism is a body of knowledge, but it's basically a philosophy. And it has a moral. Philosophy with moral. Where is our moral coming from? The teachings of Jesus. Thank you so much for participating with us tonight. We're going to stay here. We'll see you next week. And stay well. Be well. Thanks so much.